Hello, and welcome to Uniquely UCF Sociology, a podcast production of the Department of Sociology here at the University of Central Florida. I'm your host, Dr. Ramon Hinojosa. Uniquely UCF Sociology is a podcast that explores the research and creative efforts of those who are doing the good work of sociology. Want to know what sociology is and what contributions sociology makes to improving our lives? Well, you've come to the right podcast. It's Uniquely UCF Sociology. Today, I'm speaking with Marina Rivera, a master's student in the Department of Sociology at the University of Central Florida. Marina is the 2022 co-winner of the Public Sociology Award in the Department of Sociology. And this is an award that recognizes unique contributions to the discipline of sociology. Marina is the creator, writer, and co-host of the Free the Mind, Free the People podcast, a podcast show that explores sociology and social life. Her research is currently focused on understanding Christian nationalism and its links to racial and ethnic strife in the United States. Hello, Marina, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, we are excited to have you and to hear from you. So let's start by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you do your undergraduate work and what was it in?
Yeah, so first, I'm currently, as you mentioned, a sociology master's student at the University of Central Florida. I'm also a graduate teaching assistant, and I will be beginning my second year in the master's program. And my main interests right now are race, gender, Christianity, and nationalism. But for my undergrad thesis, I actually did a gender ideology and identity among conservative Baptist women. That was what I was studying at the time. And I forgot to mention, I did that at the University of Central Florida as well.
Okay, excellent. And so the focus on Christianity and nationalism sounds like it's just an extension of the work that you have done before.
Yes.
And so tell us a little bit about your thesis now. I know you've been working on it for a little bit of time. And, what is it? What are you looking at? And who are you talking to?
Yeah, so right now, my master's thesis is focused on Christian nationalism, specifically among evangelicals. And I'm looking at it from a critical race theory perspective. So that's kind of my unique contribution to that field.
Interesting. And so from a critical race perspective, I would assume that means that you're looking at the way in which things like race and ethnicity are structured within evangelical religious traditions?
Yes. So basically, I'm using the work of previous Black scholars, Black legal scholars who've founded the field of critical race theory. And so I am looking at evangelicalism, specifically white evangelicalism, within the context of the US racial domination system and basically institutionalized racism and how that overlaps with evangelicalism and specific churches as well.
And that's interesting because right now, critical race theory has become something of a hot button issue in American politics. And we know as well that evangelicals are somewhat more involved in sort of the political system. And so do you see these two movements sort of coming together in your research, or is your research motivated by what is currently happening?
Yes, so my research is very informed by my experience within evangelicalism. So I was part of a predominantly white church within evangelicalism. And so due to my experience and also what I've observed and basically how they are involved in these political movements that oppose things like critical race theory, LGBTQ plus education, abortion rights, etc. All of that, I've seen how it overlaps and intersects. And so that's how I've basically narrowed down my interest to looking at it through the critical race theory perspective to kind of just bring everything together because there's a lot going on, but it's all connected.
Certainly. And so what's the importance for you to study these issues? So when you think about what's going on and what you are currently studying, why is that important? Why would we want to understand that?
Yes. So I guess I should start by defining what Christian nationalism is, because some people might have heard of it, but don't know exactly what it means. And so nationalism at the moment is also another, it's like an emerging topic in the media. I'm not sure about sociology, but specifically in the media. And there is no specific definition of Christian nationalism because it is an evolving, it's a new term. It really is a new term, and it's evolving within sociology. So, but one way that we can think about it is basically it's the overlap between Christian symbols and Christian beliefs and other ideals like, or ideologies like patriotism, things like national identity, ideas of heritage. So it's a blend of these things. And ultimately, Christian nationalist beliefs favor this idea that America is a Christian nation, and it was a Christian nation at its origins, and that it should be enforced. It should be reestablished as a Christian nation through policies and institutions. So that's why currently with what we're seeing, obviously we have heard about the Roe v. Wade being overturned, and other policies that have come to the forefront, again, against CRT, LGBTQ plus sex ed, and critical race theory in schools. But what that really means is just any sort of conversation about LGBTQ people or race as a whole in schools. And also we've seen some efforts to provide more protections for religious institutions, many of which are Christian, and many of which are known to be discriminatory in some of their practices. So all of these things, when we listen to politicians, specifically conservative politicians, arguing for these policies, there's a lot of that Christian nationalism rhetoric in those arguments. So it's kind of like an underlying belief that is being reproduced in these policies. And in my understanding, in my research, I see Christian nationalism as a part of a broader historical pattern of reactions to social changes and demographic changes, which is why it's a particularly important topic when we talk about white evangelicals and just white conservatives in general. And so in my view, that's why it's urgent. It's an urgent thing that needs to be addressed, because it is guiding a lot of the policy on the conservative side recently.
And that's really interesting. You know, one of the things that I find fascinating about sociology is really the ability to look at where power rests in society and how power gets transacted. And so your research would suggest that it's the merging of both a religious ideology and sort of political practice coming together to try and reshape laws and policies sort of centered on Christianity, at least as it's understood historically. That is really fascinating. And so I know that you're working on this project. I also know that you have recently won the 2022 Public Sociology Award. Could you tell us a little bit about that award and how you won it? What happened there?
Yes. So I guess I'll start with the podcast, because we were awarded the Public Sociology Award for the podcast, Free the Mind, for the People. And so the podcast was created by me and Hallie Spencer, who is another, she's my co-host and also a fellow sociology grad student. And so we created Free the Mind, for the People because we were both just discussing how we were passionate about sharing sociology with our friends and family. And we really like to have those conversations about sociology and what we learned in our classes. And we also knew that a lot of scholarship, and there's a lot of conversation within academia, especially when we got to grad school, about how sociology and in general, scholars can can communicate their discipline in ways that are complicated. Like we talk about jargon and just language that's not how we typically communicate on our day-to-day basis.
Mhm.
So we really wanted to create a space where we could have conversations about sociology that would still be understandable and relatable to most people, especially those that aren't students or part of academia. So that's how that started. And then we are really honored to receive that award. We were actually surprised, not because we didn't expect support, but because we knew we were doing something out of the box within academia. We knew about podcasts, but we didn't know that about any professors or like grad students that were doing podcasts that were related to sociology specifically.
Mhm.
So for that reason, we really didn't know what to expect. And so we're really just happy to see that people in the program, both faculty and students, have seen the value in what we're doing and our passion for bringing sociology to the public, to the general public. And we really hope that this award opens up more opportunities for future students to come up with new and creative ways to share sociology with the public. And as you called it, like once, Dr. Hinojosa, you said sociology for the masses. So basically, that's what we want.
Excellent. Excellent. So the idea of sociology or academia in general is that you do your research, you publish in an academic journal, right? And then it just sits on a shelf somewhere, right? It goes into the journals and it's a very selective audience. And so in some ways, it's almost like a closed system, right? You have to
Yes.
speak the language, you got to know the jargon. And so what your Free the Mind, Free the People podcast does is it takes these ideas and turns them into relatable, accessible conversations. So tell us a little bit about the show. What is the show about, and where's the show headed?
Yeah, so we've decided to split up the episodes into kind of like a chapter one, chapter two kind of thing. Um, and we started off the first chapter with a couple episodes on first what sociology means and why we created the podcast. We actually really just wanted to have that conversation about why sociology has value and why we want to share it with others in ways that are relatable. So far, we've discussed, well, a lot of different topics, but we started off with basically establishing sociology as a discipline. And then we veered off a little bit into our personal lives. So we wanted to kind of create that personal connection and explain, so how do we get to sociology? Why are we in sociology? What value do we see in it based on our own experiences? And so I'm a Puerto Rican woman. I was born and raised there, and I moved there, when I was in 8th grade. So I discussed that a little bit and just how that living in the community that I ended up living at, which is a predominantly white community. Basically, I took more of a personal but also sociological approach to telling my story. And the same thing, my co-host Hallie, she did the same thing, talking about her experience as a Jewish woman and her grandparents who were survivors of the Holocaust. So that was a theme in the first few episodes. And then moving forward, we really wanted to establish basically the idea of public sociology and marginalized scholars and the ways in which sociology has excluded even certain groups of people, like Black sociologists, for example. So we talked a bit about W.E.B. Du Bois and critical race theory. And we also talked about Puerto Rico. So we had some guests that were faculty members. So we had Dr. Jonathan Cox from the sociology department and Dr. Fernando Rivera, bring an expert's perspective to these topics, but also they were able to provide a perspective that talked about how to connect with communities and how they were seeking to use academia in the same way that we were and sociology, I mean, within academia. They're both really engaged with the public in their own work. So that was kind of the main theme, the recurring theme that we wanted to establish, since that's how our podcast even came to be. So now we're on a break, but we are gearing up to begin chapter 2, which will focus more on how to apply sociology in our day-to-day conversations and the things that I think we're going to be more focused on what we're living in today and the things that we're watching happen and unfold around us. So yeah, now that we've established sociology, we'll want to help people really have these conversations using a sociological lens, but still being relatable.
And, for those members of our listening audience, I would recommend that they go and listen to the episodes 1 through 6, because there's really a lot of great content there, particularly your story and Hallie's story, sort of your paths to sociology and how those experiences, your lived experiences, have sort of been shaped by location and history, and certainly relationships to centers of power, and what that means for you personally. And then we've also had both Dr. Cox and Rivera on the show as well, talking about their research. So I would encourage our listeners to go listen to that as well. Of course, I have to get my shameless plug in here because that's just what we're doing, right? So I would encourage them. But for those who are interested, what I'll do is I'll put all of the links to the episodes in this podcast description. And so if you have an interest, go take a listen. I think that you'll like what you hear. Free the Mind, Free the People, co-hosted by Marina Rivera and Hallie Spencer. Go check it out. So I want to switch gears a little bit and ask about your experience as a graduate student in sociology. So for those members of our listening audience who are out there thinking, hey, maybe this is something that I want to do, give us a sense of what it's like to be a grad student.
Yes. So being a grad student in sociology is a lot of work. I won't sugarcoat it. It is a lot of work. But I think that, well, first of all, I'm really passionate about sociology generally. I knew that this was something that I wanted to get myself into. And I prepared for it. I spoke with previous students that were ahead of me a year or two. So I actually would advise students, if they're interested in joining a grad program, whatever program it may be, definitely connect with, create relationships with students ahead of you.
Absolutely.
Mostly all of us are available here to give you advice and kind of like just tell you generally what it's like. And so just to be, again, transparent, it is a lot of work, but because I am passionate about it, it is something that I don't regret doing at all. And having those conversations with previous students before making the decision to join the program really helped solidify that decision for me.
Now, when you say it's a lot of work, what's a lot of work? Give us a sense of what that's like.
So the majority of your time as a graduate student is spent either reading or writing. And that seems not too complicated, but it can be very taxing on your mental health at times. You're stuck in studying, it depends on what you study too, I will say. But it's a lot of heavy material. It's a lot of theory, and a lot of good, useful material. But it does take discipline to keep in mind, there is a lot to cover. So it takes discipline to kind of get yourself in the zone and focus on your own interests and what you can get out of each class and each reading. And I've always been told, we've all been told, when you're in grad school, your focus should be, yes, it's a lot of work. Yes, it's a lot of reading and writing, but your focus should be building up for what you're interested in ultimately. So kind of creating that foundation of knowledge for your specific research interests, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And so a lot of reading, a lot of writing, certainly, the classes in theory and methods can be pretty heavy
Yes.
as you're beginning to practice these techniques. And so I'm curious, I know it takes a lot of discipline and it takes a lot of dedication to see oneself through the program. So how do you personally balance your work-life load?
Yes, I will say it's a process. I think that every semester I am restructuring how I do things. But in undergrad, I was very much disorganized, and I was like, I have 7 hours. I'm gonna read and write for these 7 hours. And that is not healthy. um, it's not as like helpful as you would think, as it sounds. So now that I've gone through the first 2 semesters of the master's program, I've had to, because it's so much work, I've had to find ways to distribute my time in a way that's balanced. Again, going to the question. But I think that, so first, I personally struggle with, there's the expectation, what's expected of us. There's what we can realistically achieve. And then there's also what's healthy for us to do. Sometimes we just have to take a break because our body needs the break. And so that's something that I've slowly learned throughout this process. And so some of the things that there's 4 main things that I'm thinking that helped me through like finding this balance is, first, hobbies. And I know everyone says that, but it's true. It is absolutely true. Hobbies, you need hobbies. And I think actually the pandemic, through that time, a lot of us burnt out. And so I learned that finding things to do that don't necessarily take like intellectual work is actually good. So I go to the gym. I have some plants that I like to take care of. I like to paint, and I stray away from reading because, again, I just need that brain to rest. But some people like to read fiction, so there's that. The second thing is having friends, having connections within your cohort. So people that you can vent to before and after class and hang out with. We've made it, at least in our cohort, we've made an effort to, we've had picnics, we've done some outdoor stuff, we've done a lot occasionally, just to get out of the environment of academia and build those relationships and just support each other overall. So that's another important thing. And then the third thing that I have used a lot throughout these past 2 years has been actually therapy. And I am the mental health person in my cohort. I'm always trying to talk about it because I think it should be destigmatized. I think it's, we think of ourselves as thinkers and we're just scholars, but we are also emotional beings. We have other needs. So I think destigmatizing that in academia is really necessary. And so I would totally suggest therapy for everyone going into academia. Again, just to have that third party sort of perspective on what you're doing, and just have learn coping mechanisms throughout all the challenges that you will face.
And it's
um,
amazing. You have hit on all of the major ways that research tells us that one builds resilience, right? Through
mhm,
exercise, through having hobbies that engage you, through having social support systems like friends that you can share things with, and to have professional assistance when things get too overwhelming. And so I think that that's fantastic that you have found your way through to be able to sort of balance the heavy demands sometimes that graduate school can be with maintaining your overall mental and physical health. That's not an easy thing to do at
right.
any stage of one's career. So certainly finding that early is quite amazing. So, and I'm quite impressed. Continue to be impressed by you, Marina.
Thank you. Thank
Uh,
you. And I just wanted to add another thing. So even sociology itself, as you've mentioned, social research has shown all of this helps. And another thing, sociology in and of itself, we've learned to, at least in our program, we've learned to sociologically critique ideas of productivity, labor, success, all those things within academia and beyond. So having a sociological perspective of that does help also kind of reframe how we think about ourselves and our work.
Absolutely. And so, and I think that that's a healthy thing. I think being able to critically assess the meaning of things really puts into perspective that one does this because they want to both contribute to knowledge, but they also want to do it because it's about personal growth, right? And if you can actually merge those through things, helping society by creating knowledge and growing as a human being, well, I think that's a good accomplishment personally. So,
I agree.
well, Marina, thank you so much for taking your time today to come talk with us about your journey and your experiences.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'd also like to thank you, our listening audience, for taking time from your busy day to listen in as we discuss all things that are uniquely UCF sociology. This is Dr. Ramon Hinojosa saying thank you. I hope you'll join us next week.